I actually was working at the time, not for the movie company, but for Paramount Television Service. I moved back into feature film production.
Jeffy came to see me one day and said, "How about if I help you out on Star Trek?" And I said, "Well, what do you want to do?" He said, "Well, I'll do all the post-production and the special effects and all those production issues. You know, you continue to do all the creative relationships and, you know, developing the script, working with Bob Wise and Gene."
My job was to sort of corral everybody and, you know, supervise the development and you know, try and get a team put together to make the movie. To relaunch Star Trek and not, you know, have Leonard Nimoy is to buy a car and not have wheels. It just seemed impossible and illogical.
We had to go to see him and talk to him about it and convince him it was the thing to do.
I was, I guess, sort of given the mission of trying to at least open the doors or make the first approach to it. And the only thing that I, you know, remember in the details is being in a restaurant in New York City on my knees begging.
I offer my services as science officer.
So the only one that that I was involved in terms of casting was Steve Collins to play Decker.
Every young actor in Hollywood had been up for the film and had really been dying to get it. And I think it really helped me get the part because I walked in for the meeting and, you know, it was just a part to me. I mean, I was much more interested in meeting Robert Wise than I was in the thought of doing Star Trek.
I think I made a test of Steve and decided he was the best one to play Decker and be in the film.
I read for Bob, and by the time I got home, they'd made an offer. It was lightning fast, and I think we were shooting within 10 days.
Hello, Ilea.
Dick.
Persis Khabbat had already been cast for the role before I came on it.
Stephen Collins and Persis Khamvada, I thought, were wonderful in the picture. And, you know, the two of them kind of stood in contrast to the original cast.
Persis was very, very sweet, obviously incredibly beautiful, a very gentle person who I think was a little overwhelmed by Hollywood.
One of the big emotional times when we had to take her over to makeup and get her hair all taken off, you know, because she was bald in the film. And it was very emotional. She was almost crying as this lovely black hair was chopped off and she was finally scraped down into having a bald head. In order to make the release date that they wanted at the end of the year, we had to start shooting on the film before we had a final script. We got all the cast together on the spaceship and the cabin there. And I said to them, I'm very pleased to be here and in the midst of such legends.
I like the idea of the reunification of the old crew. And I think I wrote a couple of good scenes.
I'm sure there was lots of meetings behind closed doors, you know, discussing, well, how do we do this? How do we do this in a way that makes it distinguishable from everything else we've done so far, and you know, gives it its own life and its own uniqueness.
We were the first movie to be made from a TV series, to my knowledge. And so we were really filled with the idea of we had to make this really important. We had to make this much bigger, and we were trying too hard.
What it comes down to in a movie is you want something to change, where in an episode, especially back when they were making the original series, you don't necessarily want things to change.
Everybody had their idea of what Star Trek should be, what it needed to be, and the ideas were, in many cases, wildly divergent, and it made for a hellish experience in terms of trying to get this movie made.
The 2-hour pilot script written by Harold Livingston was then rewritten by Gene Roddenberry, rewritten by Harold Livingston, rewritten by Robert Collins, who was going to direct the pilot episode.
It had been through a tremendous number of executives. I can't even begin to count how many different studio heads we had overseeing the project. And each new level of management has different goals and different ideas as to what they want out of the picture. So it changes the nature of what you're trying to do. We finally got Bob Wise to sort of become the grounding element for it.
I know I left it 4 or 5 times and finally returned in the end to see it all the way through.
My principal task was trying to reconcile the disagreements between Harold Livingston and Gene Roddenberry.
Gene and I were always at odds.
They were both frantically writing away highly divergent versions of the same scenes, and were in a significant competition.
And I can understand Roddenberry's position. This was his creation, and he didn't want it taken from him.
But the longer they went, the more difficult it became, because after a certain number of weeks, Leonard and Bill's contracts, a clause kicked in that said they had script approval. So in addition to the producer and the associate producer, the director, you now had the vested interests of the 2 stars.
And Leonard would come to my house in the evening after he and Bill Shatner had discussed it after that day's shooting, and we rewrite or write what they wanted to do for the next day's shooting. Then Gene would come in and change it again. Bob Wise was driven quite mad with this.
The actors all have their own idea. They've been playing these roles for so long that they'd read the pages as they came up and say, well, I wouldn't say this, or I'd say that. So we had to keep rewriting, till we finally got a version each time that all the actors were agreed with. I was getting so many changes every day that we had to put a time on them, not just the date, but a time.
We had a bad script that just never worked. It was always a struggle to try to figure out how to bring some life to this project. And we did our best, but I never, the pendulum swung completely when that first movie came along, from being an actor and character-oriented Star Trek to an effects-oriented Star Trek. And the feeling was, well, we didn't have the money before, now we got the money, we've got to give them a big effects movie. So it was all about the ship, and this effect, and that effect, and we're going through this thing, and now we're going through that thing. Nothing about the characters. So it was frustrating and depressing, and very painful. Right down to the last day of shooting. We tried desperately to inject, and occasionally they'd say, okay, we'll shoot a little of that. I'd come up with an idea. They'd cut it out of the movie. And the last day, we're on the bridge shooting the final scene of the movie. We're all saying goodbye to each other. We've all come back supposedly for this mission, and now we're going back to our homes and so forth. And Crook goes around to the various characters and says, okay, Dr. McCoy, we're going to take you back. He was come out of retirement or something. We're going to take you back and go to Georgia. No. He said, I think I'm here, I'll stay. And came to me and said, Spock, we'll have it back on Vulcan in a day or 2. And I was supposed to say, fine, Captain, I think I'll stay as well or something. And I thought, let's go for some fun here. We've been so somber this entire movie. There's been no humor, no charm, which Star Trek was full of, charm and humor, full of it. So in the final rehearsal, when he came to me and McCoy had just said he was going to stay on the ship, I said, Captain, if Dr. McCoy is to stay here, my presence here will be essential. Got a big laugh out of the crew, big laugh. And then I saw a huddle with the bosses off camera. And Bob Wise, bless him, who was directing the movie, and really himself had said many times he didn't have a grasp of Star Trek, came to me and he said, well, the feeling is that it's not the right tone to end the movie. We should be a little bit more serious. And, okay. That was my gift to you. You don't want it? Fine, I'll take it back. They wouldn't let me do it. And that's an example of the kind of frustration that we had on the movie.
Leonard, I think, was the creator, certainly, of the tear sequence, a single tear. Leonard also helped substantially in the creation of the very short scene that explained V'ger's point of view, where he said,
V'ger must evolve. Its knowledge has reached the limits of this universe, and it must evolve. What it requires of its God, Doctor, is the answer to its question, is there nothing more?
These TV series had these little tiny kind of models for the spaceship, and that's one thing that bothered me, and I said now that we were going on the big screen to make a feature on it, we needed to have a good full-size model, so they made a model of the exterior of it all. I think it was about 9 feet long, big enough that I could take the camera, go around and deliver it, you know, go around and shoot around and go out and shoot this part of it and that part of it and the other part of it, because I had a big enough model.
I think I would have built them at a little larger scale than they did. It would have been much more comfortable shooting. We had to commission a special periscope lens system in order to get the lens close enough to the model to get the angles we wanted. So the periscope was about 3 feet out in front of the lens to kind of sneak in under the nacelle or between the wings or whatever and get the angles. We wanted to have enough lights on board the ship to where it would look like it could light itself up. You'd have a little light coming out of the fuselage shining up on the wing that was supporting this nacelle that was the thruster. With lights inside those. If you assume that a spaceship is kind of in the solar system, the sun is there somewhere, so you've got a key light. And I said, well, in this movie, we're nowhere in the solar system. There is no sun. And the source of illumination, I think, has to be the Enterprise itself. Once we had justified it with a few little lights shining on itself, then we felt we could, well, we'll put about 10 times as many little flecks of light as though they're sources of light, which are completely fake. But we came up with a very simple technique of just shining one big light into a big cluster of little dental mirrors, little mirrors about an inch in diameter on a little swivel, and you could just take that one light and turn it into 50. And so it gave all these little flecks, which gave it scale, because there's no one big light, there should be hundreds of small lights.
Harold I had worked with on a number of films before as a production designer, along with Morris Leffen I used many times. So when the chance came to do the show, I brought Harold on because I had experience with him and I knew he'd do a very good job.
Because there was a time limit, there was a release date. I had a design for this while they were writing. I had the problem of saying how much of this ship was finished before they were called for this emergency to get out of the dry dock. I designed a clear plastic or plexiglass engine, so I didn't know what the power was that was powering this thing, and they put this lighting in it, and I had a long tube going back towards the tail of the ship. I went ahead and made it in forced perspective, which means smaller and smaller and smaller. There was a ramp on the side where we had a 5-foot man and 3-foot a young boy, and so it looked much bigger than it was.
When this film came up, my first thought was to get Dick Klein on to be my cinematographer because I'd liked working with him so much on the Andromeda Strain.
We didn't have the tools of the trade that now exist that make it much easier to do a film in a confined area. Nobody really knew what post-production was going to do. They didn't know either. They were magnificent in developing whatever they did under the circumstances, but we had to put reactive lighting on people. If it was a flaring effect, we'd have to put, to make it look natural, a reactive light on the set or the actors. So we were really guessing a lot of that.
It was my first encounter with blue screen. You have to somehow communicate that which the audience would see, and they are assuming that you're seeing it. You're not seeing anything.
Well, it's very difficult. They had to look at this view screen in there, and I didn't have anything on that show them. So I had to talk them through it. I had to describe what I thought was going to be on that screen so they could react to that.
The fact that also there was a lot of silver in the set made it very difficult because of the reflectiveness of it. It would pick up the blue screen. And so that's why we would have a lock-off, shoot the actors in front of the blue screen, and then turn off the blue screen so that Doug Trumbull and his group could now, I guess you call it rotoscoping in this case, where you could actually now frame out the bleed, if there was a bleed, of the blue screen coming through.